Until the end of the 19th century, United States had special relationships primarily with nearby Mexico and Cuba. Otherwise, relationships with other Latin American countries was of minor importance to both sides, consisting mostly of a small amount of trade. Apart from Mexico, there was little migration to the United States, and little American financial investment. Politically and economically, Latin America, apart from Mexico and the Spanish colony of Cuba, was largely tied to Britain. The United States had no involvement in the process by which Spanish possessions broke away and became independent around 1820. In cooperation with and help from Britain, the United States issued the Monroe Doctrine in 1823, warning against the establishment of any additional European colonies in Latin America. Texas, settled primarily by Americans, fought a successful war of independence against Mexico in 1836. Mexico refused to recognize that independence and warned that annexation to the United States meant war. Annexation came in 1845, war came in 1846. The American military was easily triumphant. The result was the American purchase of New Mexico, Arizona, California and adjacent areas. About 60,000 Mexicans remained in the new territories and became U.S. citizens. France took advantage of the American Civil War, 1861–65, using its army to take over Mexico regardless of strong American protests. With the U.S. victorious in the war, France pulled out, leaving its puppet emperor to his fate in front of a Mexican firing squad. As unrest in Cuba escalated in the 1890s, the United States demanded reforms that Spain was unable to accomplish. The result was the short successful Spanish-American War of 1898, in which United States acquired Puerto Rico, and set up a protectorate over Cuba. The building of the Panama Canal absorbed American attention from 1903. The U.S. facilitated a revolt that made Panama independent, and set up the Panama Canal Zone as an American-owned and operated district was finally returned to Panama in 1979. The canal opened in 1914, and proved a major factor in world trade. United States paid special attention to protection of the military approaches to the Panama Canal, including threats by Germany. Repeatedly it seized temporary control of several countries, especially Haiti and Nicaragua. The Mexican Civil War started in 1911, it alarmed American business interests that had invested in Mexican mines and railways. Tensions escalated almost to the point of war, but the crisis was peacefully resolved and the main grievances between the two nations over oil were resolved by the late 1930s. Large numbers of Mexicans fled the war-torn revolution into the southwestern United States. Meanwhile, the United States increasingly replaced Britain as the major trade partner and financier throughout Latin America. The U.S. adopted a good neighbor policy in the 1930s, which meant friendly trade relations would continue regardless of political conditions or dictatorships. United States signed up the major countries as allies against Germany and Japan in World War II. Argentina, however, refused to cooperate. The diplomatic tensions died down after the war. The turn of Castro's revolution in Cuba after 1959 toward Soviet communism alienated the United States. An attempted invasion failed, and at the peak of the Cold War in 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis threatened major war as the Soviet Union installed nuclear weapons in Cuba to defend it from an American invasion. There was no invasion, but the United States imposed an economic boycott on Cuba that remains in effect, as well as a break of diplomatic relations that lasted until 2015. The U.S. also saw the rise of left-wing governments in Central America as a threat, and in some cases, overthrew democratically elected governments perceived at the time as becoming left-wing or unfriendly to U.S. interests. 1. Examples include the 1954 Guatemalan coup d'état, the 1964 Brazilian coup d'état, the 1973 Chilean coup d'état, and the support of the Contra rebels in Nicaragua. In the 1980s, the United States gave strong support to anti-communist forces in Latin America. The fall of Soviet communism in 1989–91 largely ended the communist threat. By 2015, relations remain tense between United States and Venezuela. Large-scale Mexican immigration grew the late 20th century, so that over 10 million undocumented immigrants lived in the United States, sending money back home and asking whether they or their children could get U.S. citizenship. Furthermore, large-scale immigration came from smaller countries such as Haiti and the Dominican Republic. By the late 19th century, the rapid economic growth of the United States increasingly troubled Latin America. A Pan-American Union was created under American auspices, but it had little impact. As did its successor, the Organization of American States. After 1960, Latin America increasingly supplied illegal drugs, especially marijuana and cocaine, to the rich American market. One consequence was the growth of extremely violent drug gangs in Mexico and other parts of Central America to control the drug supply. NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, took effect in 1994, and dramatically increased the volume of trade among Mexico, United States and Canada.